Hey everyone. Today we're talking with Amy Simmons, the founder of Amy's Ice Cream in Austin, Texas. Amy was a really interesting interview. She is a professional boxer. She was the first professional boxer in Austin, the first female professional boxer in Austin. She's a marathoner. She is a feminist. She is a leader in the small business community. And she originally went to school to be a doctor, ended up founding one ice cream shop with investment that she received from a janitor that she had met, and has built that now into about 15 stores in Austin and over $9 million in revenue. Amy's Ice Cream has been around for over 30 years now, and they've grown intentionally slowly, relatively slowly, in order to maintain their Austin weirdness, as Amy calls it. I learned something in every one of these interviews, and in this interview, you know how everyone measures large things in terms of how many football fields they make up? I learned why people measure things in football fields, and I learned it the hard way.
This podcast is supported by our friends at MailChimp.
We use MailChimp to send out our newsletters, and so do over 8 million other businesses.
Visit MailChimp.com to learn more.
First things first, I would like to know what your favorite flavor of ice cream is.
Well, I love trying new flavors, but my long-term favorite has been Belgian chocolate with Reese's peanut butter cups crushed in.
Ooh. Are you part of the R&D process for the new flavors?
Yes. I'm a taster.
Nice. So so usually, Amy, we start with kind of asking about the story of how you started Amy's Ice Cream. I'd like to back up actually a little bit and ask about just kind of where you grew up and what jobs and experiences and failures led you to be a small business person.
Okay. I love that story. My first real job where I got a paycheck when it went on my Social Security record was Arby's roast beef, which I do have my Arby's name badge here in my drawer here.
No way.
Wow.
I do. And I love that job because, I just got a chance to do a good job. And I was, people said, hey, you're doing a great job. And I felt really rewarded. And I liked being nice to people. And then after that, realized I was good at it. I waitressed and I made a fortune waitressing because I've got the disposition for it.
Mm-hmm.
My undergraduate degree, I then went to Tufts University in Boston, and I was going to be a doctor. It's kind of weird straddling this time with feminism because, my mother had to really fight to be where she was. But I definitely didn't want to step backwards, and so I really thought I would do something obvious. When you're successful, it's obvious, like be a doctor, lawyer, architect. So that's kind of where the medicine thing came, and I thought my advantage was.
What would be? Sorry to interrupt. What would be stepping backwards in that case?
Not being as successful as my mom.
Okay.
Yeah. It never occurred to me to just raise my kids, which it's kind of interesting looking backwards. I wish I had opened that up as a choice, but not that I would have done anything differently, but just seen it as an option.
Mm-hmm.
But. I went to Tufts to study medicine, and I was undergraduate biology, psychology, pre-med. I studied neurological psychology, loved it. Worked at Harvard Primate Center, and I worked at Tufts Medical School doing research. And I worked at an ice cream store for cash money, Steve's Ice Cream, and I was the first female ice cream maker. I was the first of lots of things. I was the first when they decided to open the second Steve's location in Manhattan. They asked me if I would manage it, and so I was the first manager. It was kind of an interesting dynamics because it was townies and then people who worked, which is not derogatory; it's a compliment. Anyway, absolutely loved working for them. Went to Manhattan, opened that store. The guy who owned it was Joey Crugnali, and he's definitely one of my mentors. And I'm not positive he ever finished high school, but he had more business sense than anybody I've ever met.
What are some things specifically you remember about Joey and kind of what he did that you remember so well?
Well, I mean, when they offered me the job in Manhattan and offered me something like $20,000 to take it, and I'm debating between going to med school and or taking a little hiatus and earn some money and save some money, so it's a little less scary. And I thought at that time the formula for your housing was a quarter of your income. And I went back to him and I said, I think 20 is really reasonable, but I've always learned it's, you spend 25% of your income on your housing, and I can't find anything for 25% of 20,000 in New York City. And so they got a company, apartment, and they let me choose it. So letting me choose it, I mean, that's just insane. And then also I set up the banking relationships. One of my favorite stories was setting up the garbage collection. I did all the research. I found all the different garbage collecting companies, and I chose the one that was going to be the cheapest. And they just laugh because it was mafia, and I had no choice. He said, "This is the one that you take." Oh, I get it.
Yeah, so, it sounds like a guy named Joey Crugnali would know that right off the bat.
So just the credit that they gave. There was an article in Newsday when it opened, and instead of Joey coming down and getting his picture taken, and I'm sure he wanted his picture in Newsday, that's a big deal, and he let it be a picture of me, and he gave the credit to me. It's just, I felt like that was the first Amy's Ice Cream. So, I'd just do anything for him.
Wow. And so after managing the Steves in Manhattan, you immediately moved to Austin to get Amy started?
No, I went down to Coconut Grove, Florida, because they were seeding franchises in different states. And then he sold the company, and he got a great return on it, and he was real decent to everybody who worked for him. But the company that bought it was called Integrated Resources, and it's a real estate company that was starting on the New York Stock Exchange, starting a restaurant division. They hired a guy named George Carter from Burger King. He was a multi-unit operator. And he came in. I was managing down there. My assistant manager I hired was a Yale graduate. I hired him for $14,000 a year. And George Carter comes in and he ignores my assistant manager. And if you're going to grow a company, the one thing is that your most important asset is your people. And if you're going to go rapidly, you need a lot of great people fast. And so that's what you need to spend attention on. And he completely ignored this next generation of Scott. And then he took me into the men's restroom, where he asked me to go into the men's restroom. I said, nah, the guy's clean in there. So if it's not clean, I'll make sure and put some, more attention on it. Sanitation is very important in food service. But he goes, no, come on in. And he proceeded to show me the toilet and how men go to the bathroom. He didn't show me how men go to the bathroom differently, but he explained it to me, and how that there's a ring in the men's toilet that's different than the women's toilet. This is my first interaction with this guy.
What?
And I knew at that point that, no, I'm not going to, Scott and I both thought, well, this is a huge company buying Steve's. Maybe, we can go to law school, learn, do work in franchising. There's opportunity. So we weren't, just because it sold didn't mean that we were all set to leave. We were optimistic about, what else we might try with it. Mm-hmm. But that whole interaction told us immediately that was a bad news. And
it sounds like this guy, this integrated manager, had a different calling.
Yeah. But, the proof was in the failure. It failed, I think, within a year. And then Steve's, which was an incredible brand, just literally evaporated. So my assistant manager, Scott, and I decided that, we could do it better. Not only could we do it, we could do it better. We actually looked at London, to open in London, but the economy was flat. The weather was kind of bad. You had to buy your leases up front. So instead of in the U.S., paying 1 month down as a deposit and paying your first month's rent, you had to literally buy a 10-year lease, which would double the amount of money we had to raise. It's commonplace now to hear about people writing business plans, but back then it wasn't. It was just the start of Inc. magazine. I like to liken it to chefs, that entrepreneurs were, dirty, nasty people who didn't make very much money and worked too hard. And chefs were the same thing. They were in the kitchen. They had no glory. And all of a sudden, we started in '84. It was right around then that it started being prestigious to be an entrepreneur. And we got our template for writing the business plan from the SBA. We met with SCORE retired executives, and they were super helpful. So we read an article in The Economist about the high-tech growth in Austin and how everybody was moving from New England, Route 128, and moving from California. And a lot of our customers were techie guys and gals. And so we thought, I wonder if Austin has a good ice cream store. I came down here. They had an ice cream store, but the product was lousy. And the market seemed great. University of Town, it really reminded me of Ann Arbor. It's a liberal city and a conservative state, so all the cool, interesting, creative people come here. And the business people were incredibly cooperative. They were really forthcoming with information. Coming into Austin at that time, within the center of Austin, there wasn't a single franchise. You didn't see TGI Fridays. You didn't see Bennigan's. They were local, well-developed brands. It was really different than any place else I'd ever been.
You seem pretty mobile at this point, Amy. I mean, you've gone from Michigan to Boston to New York.
Yep.
You're kind of just searching in the paper basically and find Austin. So this ice cream shop is your very first priority at this point?
I love to think that I was cognizant of everything at the time. I was just a dumb kid. I wanted adventure and I wanted challenge, and everything was open to me. I'm very conservative financially, so I always had a little bit of money in the bank. I think also I think often about, is the American dream open to everybody? And the thing that my parents never gave me any money. It was kind of a funny spot between my father and I, because he was so mad at me not to let him invest in Amy's, certainly after it was successful. But we wouldn't let our close friends or family invest, because we figured we needed them when 95% of small business fails. We figured we need them. But, it was kind of a challenge. I mean, and when I woke up in the ice cream business, and my partner left pretty early, 2 years into Amy's.
How come?
He was a serial entrepreneur. He opened a company for his mom back in Coconut Grove, and it was failing. And so he, felt like he had kind of put her in that situation. He's very, very ethical. And so he sold his stock in Amy's, which I couldn't afford to buy, and moved down and helped her. And unfortunately, it did go bankrupt, but he gave it his all. Mm-hmm. But I was stuck. I'm operating it. We had 22 shareholders. The way we structured it was $6,000 blocks for 2.5% of the company, and $3,000 was equity. $3,000 was a 3-year note, paying 12%, I guess, at the time.
How did you find these investors?
The lead investor was the janitor at Steve's. I love that story. He has an ice cream store. He has an ice cream store in Boston called Tuscanini's. I hope you know it. He's my hero. He's just brilliant and well-read and incredibly just adventurous. But he was the janitor at Steve's, and I used to stay late and help him clean and just talk to him because he was fascinating. But he sent me a check for $5,000, and it had a note. This is before Post-its. But it said, "Send me some stock when you get some." So he had no idea what percentage of the company he was buying, but he just, I love telling this story. I hope this isn't inspirational, but that it's so important that you're yourself and that you're kind of true to your own values throughout your life, because you never know who's going to make it different. You never know who has the keys to your future. And I feel like
that's so amazing.
Yeah, he invested because, I did what I said I was going to do. I always filled shifts for other people who were having, needed to get out for something. I worked hard. I was honest. Those are the things that you can kind of count on.
So he invested, and he didn't even know how much he was going to get. And then based on that, you said, okay, I'll find these other investors?
Well, the lead investor is the toughest to get. The rest of the investors were I think about 4 of them were customers down in Coconut Grove. Some of them were Scott Shaw went to Yale, and some of them were not his close friends, but indirect friends or contacts from Yale. We met this guy who owned the Popeyes franchise down here in Austin, and his company was Kickin' Chicken. And he invested, and he had 2 buddies that ended up investing. And, they were all kind of arm's length people.
How long did it take you to raise this money?
I think we moved down here in June and we opened the company in November. Okay. So probably 3 or 4 months to actually get it all funded. But I think people want to be a part of something fun. Yeah. Ice cream business sounded fun. We were high energy. It was a low, we purposely made it so that the investment was small, so it wasn't, somebody's life savings, and also that each person owned only 2.5%, so their voice wasn't going to be particularly dominant, and we could maybe make the decisions.
Okay, so let's start then with you getting the money. November happens. What do you do? What's your first step starting at this ice cream store?
So very little money, guerrilla marketing, and making friends and connecting with groups of people who would be supportive of us. So one thing we did is to give away free ice cream the first day, because we figured if they're free anything, there's going to be a line. And people drive by and they see the line, they go, oh, that place must be good, and then they try it. But also the location we picked was really important. Well, two decisions were really important. One was the location, because if you weren't from Austin, you'd pick what we call the drag, which is right across from the university. And the that's a death nail, because you're tied to the students. The general population doesn't want to go down there. Students are fairly poor, and 25% of your student population is turning over each year. Right. And then the other one is 6th Street, which was kind of a bar scene, and ice cream loses to alcohol 90% of the time. So those would have been bad decisions. So the way we picked our location was next to a place called Texas French Bread, which was selling $1.25 croissants, and they had a line out the door. So we figured if they could sell enough croissants to pay the rent, then we can sell enough ice creams to pay the rent, and that they're going to have enough people coming in and out of their shop getting exposed to our product. And so we chose a real, kind of an odd location, but it ended up being fabulous. So that location was great decision number 1 in retrospect. And great decision number 2 in retrospect was naming it Amy's. Because one, I'm the one who stayed, and maybe it's because it was called Amy's that I stayed. But Scott would say, I came from Steve. We both came from Steve's Ice Cream. We didn't want to copy them. Mm-hmm. So if it was Scott's Ice Cream, that's kind of copying them. We didn't want to name it a name at all, but we were trying to come up with a name, and everything sounded too dorky, like Crushins and Cream, or it just was. So naming it Amy's was so important, because along with entrepreneurs becoming relevant, female entrepreneurs were becoming really relevant. Right. And they liked women in non-threatening careers, like Mrs. Fields Cookies and Amy and Amy's Ice Creams.
Interesting.
So I got tons of press, primarily because I was a woman and in a fun business.
Were you making your own ice cream with your first store?
Oh yeah. So Steve's made their own ice cream. We didn't want to copy them, so we chose a different machine. I went to Recker's ice cream dairy program and learned how to make a base dairy for the dairy. We chose not to actually manufacture that, but just create the recipe for a large manufacturer because of the bacteria risks. And so we found a dairy to produce it, and then we just experimented with making flavors and trying to kind of free our mind and think of new ways to do it. And so we blind taste tested all the chocolates we could find: American chocolate, Swiss, Belgian. We landed blind on Callebaut chocolate from Belgium. And then we went and looked. A guy named Warren LaRuth from New Orleans won the best vanilla ice cream in the country. And so we went to him and he had just started wholesaling it, so we started making Mexican vanilla, which was one of his products, and then his regular vanilla.
And Mexican vanilla has been a really popular flavor for you, am I right?
30% of our sales Mexican vanilla. Yeah,
That's great.
it's really our signature flavor.
That's amazing. How much? I'm going to skip forward real quick. How many gallons of ice cream do you sell per year?
I wish I knew the answer to that question. I'm sorry. Joe knows the answer to that question.
So I want to do eventually, yeah. I want to picture the amount of ice cream you sell in terms of swimming pools. That's my ultimate goal.
Okay,
or football fields, what everything is
football.
Referenced in.
Yeah, okay, I can get that for you, but I don't have it. Yeah, I think last year we did about $9 million in sales. If the average scoop is $3 and it's 6 ounces.
I'm having trouble, Craig.
No, I'm not the math guy.
So we ended up doing the math on this. $9 million in sales with an average scoop price of $3 means that there are 3 million scoops sold per year. And if a scoop is 6 ounces, that's 18 million ounces, which comes out to 140,000 gallons. 140,000 gallons of ice cream would fill up exactly 0 swimming pools. 140,000 gallons would fill only about a third of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So the visualization fell flat right there. But if you measure it in terms of football fields and consider that every scoop is 3 inches in diameter and you laid them end to end to end to end, that ends up making 9 million inches back to back, which is 142 miles of ice cream or over 2,000 football fields. It's 2,083 football fields of ice cream end to end. Hence why things are measured in terms of football fields.
So Amy, what did the first year look like in terms of revenue?
I think we did, the first full year, I think we did about 225,000.
That's 51 football fields if we're keeping track.
Okay. And so then at what point did you decide, okay, we're making enough, we want to grow, we want to expand?
I don't know that we ever said that. We,
Okay.
It's just, opportunities come to you and you go, well, I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't, we did say, okay, you really can't make very much ice cream. I mean, you can't make very much money in the ice cream business. And so if we have more sales, maybe we can spread overhead over more. So that did make us open to the concept, but we opened our second store exactly 1 year, almost to I think off by 1 day from our first store. And the great thing, I love opening this store. I love telling this story to people now when you can get a 3.5% loan. It was 18% interest and we couldn't get that loan. So we paid our shareholders 6% interest to guarantee an 18% loan. So we're paying 24% on the loan to open the second store.
And
so we're highly motivated to pay that down.
Yeah, very fast. And so how did you find the second location? I'm fascinated by this. I was talking to a guy one time who worked in senior living. And so he was looking for locations to build these facilities. And what he would do to pick the locations is drive around and look for homes with basketball hoops that didn't have nets on them anymore. And so that indicated that these were people who had children of age to still have a basketball hoop, but be old enough to not have a net anymore. So they were kind of like out of the house. And so these people are the deciders for, like the all nearing elderly age folks to go into these homes. So I was wondering if you had any kind of like tried and true methods for finding locations other than looking for croissant stores.
I think I have a good gut sense. I mean, that's always been my best, is just my gut. So with that said, I think we've opened 24 stores. So obviously 9 have not worked. And so it's been a learning curve, but this was really on the outside of town. It was an outdoor center in Texas, which was a little controversial. It had a theater, which seemed like, my number one is synergy. And I think I knew that back then. I also, I watched a little bit of Steve's expanding and I watched what worked and didn't work for Steve's, but, the theater I thought was going to be good synergy. It was called the Arboretum, so it had an outdoor area, which was great because I feel like people don't just go and get ice cream; they get ice cream and walk around or like to look at things. It was a really beautiful area.
Yeah.
So and they wanted us. They really wanted us. So, and we were early in, so we got a really good lease deal. Yeah, and then beyond that, right now, we don't work great in suburban locations. We are really great synergy with toy stores or just anything where you could grab an ice cream and walk around and look and do something else.
I want to talk about your growth approach because from what I hear, you intentionally grow slowly. And I've heard that you've been approached to kind of franchise this out to be, bigger across the country, and you've said no. So I'm wondering what your philosophy is, if you can kind of distill it for growth.
Bo Burlingham wrote a book called Small Giants, and I think, that's a cluster of businesses that are similar to Amy's. Real early on, well, first of all, at one point I went, oh my God, I'm in the ice cream business. I was supposed to go to med school, and is this enough for me? I mean, I have a good education. I really wanted to be successful. And, I want to make my mother proud. I want to make myself proud. Is this academic enough? Because I'm highly driven by continuous learning. And so I was really searching. It feels good. It feels like this is enough. So why is it? And what I really found is that there are three components to Amy's that were really feeding my soul. One was the constant contact with a youthful population, because they're the creative thinkers, they're the risk takers, and they even something as simple as continuing to listen to new music and not stopping when you stop college. And so getting exposed to that thought was really valuable to me. Two was our community. Austin, as an individual, you can do charitable work, but you can make, only so much impact. Yeah. But the ice cream store was really able to contribute to the charitable community. Education community, our values are education and primarily child charities. The ice cream store can do phenomenal things. We could get attention. People need different things. We could either raise money, we could get attention. We could, we work in the early days. We worked with Aid Services Austin a ton, and we funded a place called Christopher House, which was one of those places where what is it called? Where you go to pass away peacefully, and so we were able to make a big difference in our community. We were out in communities and schools. We were teaching restaurant math, even from the very beginning. So making math relevant to young people in a really fun and inspiring and in a way that they could really understand and embrace. So Amy's really became this opportunity to teach capitalism and small business and business finance to people.
I wish we could spend a whole episode. Craig, I see you moving too. I wish we could spend a whole episode talking about that, because you hear kind of today, business gets a little bit of a bad rap. Small business, not always, but sometimes it gets lumped in there as well. But this idea that business almost on its own, and then also all the things that it makes that you're able to do in the community, is extremely valuable. And I think underestimated, underappreciated.
Yeah, I think, even I grew up with a dialogue of business is bad. There's something that's out there that's business is bad. It's capitalism. Yeah. Its motive is money. Money is materialistic. It's bad. But my mother grew up in Rochester, New York, and she pointed to George Eastman. She said, one man changed this really industrial, impoverished city. Mm-hmm. And created the arts, made it available to everybody. Obviously Ford's philosophy of paying his workers so they could afford his products and bringing everybody up. It's what you do with it. It's what you do with the money. It's what you do with the organization. But yeah, I agree on the whole episode. This is literally our reason to be at Amy's right now. We're huge followers of Jack Stack and the Great Game of Business. We've been open book for about 8 years. Our employees know, 16-year-old employees can read cash flow, balance sheet, income statement. They practice their own personal finance. We share rewards. Our goal is to birth entrepreneurs and give them skill sets and the atypical people too. So the people who are not, your typical business people.
You talk about creating young entrepreneurs. What advice do you give your employees and people that just come and are inspired by you, and maybe even people listening to this? What do you tell them if they want to start their own business?
Well, obviously planning, really thinking through things, and that's not for investors as much as it's for you. Think about, what it looks like when you get there, so make sure that's where you want to be. I think the personal lesson I've learned is I've always felt a little different, and I ended up getting my MBA at UT, but my inside dialogue's going, they're going to find me out. They're going to find me out. I'm not as smart as they are. I'm not as smart as they are. Really trust yourself. You got to trust yourself, and then trust those things that are different, because those are going to be your competitive advantage. And also, don't just accept the world the way it's coming to you, because you can make a difference in it. If you want the world to be a certain way, you can create that place as long as there's enough people like you, and then people learn from you that's okay. Conservative financially, that's been my approach. Really learning. I wasn't necessarily, I wasn't a math major. My brother's genetically, I think we have real strong math skills, but really getting into QuickBooks and understanding financials and turning them inside out, they're a blast. And I think, if I see young people, well, I teach young people, so even as early as like second or third grade, and you get them real early and you can speak to what they're, what's meaningful to them. I think you can teach that really early on so that it's a second language.
I love that. That's so cool.
So
I wish,
Yeah, me too.
I wish financial literacy was like a course in my high school, and I knew nothing about
nothing. And they're doing a little bit now, but not even enough. It's such an obvious thing.
Oh, totally. Yeah, and yet when John and I both went to NYU together, and I did not put two and two together when I started signing those $20,000 loans. I knew nothing about financing anything, and yet they say well, you're 18 now, you can sign this, and
woo,
yeah, right,
debt.
Yeah, that was fun. It still is fun.
Yeah, I remember when we first opened Amy's, there was a chocolatier that had opened about the same time, and they were advertising all over the place. And I looked at the place I would advertise, and it was a lot of money. And I thought, well, I got to sell a lot of ice cream cones to cover that. I can't see, I can maybe see just making that up, but that's not my goal. My goal is to get more. But I kept watching them and saying, how are they doing it? I don't get it. What don't I know? And, I was questioning myself, not questioning them, and they went out of business.
Yep. I guess the last question I kind of always like to ask, if a young person asks you, should they start an ice cream store, would you tell them yes?
No, it's too hard. The margins are too low. I mean, I suppose it depends where you are. The reward is great, and it's worked for me. So it sure sounds like I'm just trying to keep the competition out. But
Yep.
Open a little restaurant instead, where you create happiness in a different way. Because like Phil's does $1.5 million in sales, and the best Amy's does 800,000, and they both pay virtually the same rent. They both have a manager. They both have electricity. It's just hard with an ice cream store. It's really hard.
Thanks for checking out this week's episode. If you haven't left us a review yet on iTunes, we'd really appreciate it.
One last thing before we go. Next week, our interview is about the business of being in a heavy metal band.
We didn't sit around for that 6 months to a year bitching about the fact that downloading's ruining music. You know what we did? We were like, hey, it is what it is, and then we just kept writing music. and got through it.
The band's name is Nonpoint, and they've personally been my favorite band for many years, so I'm really excited to give you this interview. Tune in next week to hear it.
So if you'd like to follow along with what we do and some of the extra stuff we, capture and create while we're out recording these interviews, we think you should check out our MailChimp newsletter. We send out photos, we send out all kinds of other stuff with every single episode. So if you go to saltpodcast.com, you can sign up for that. And thanks again to MailChimp for supporting the show. See you next week.